been trapped inside this heart of mine. If you could let me out of my body, this feeling's got me out of my mind. Without you, without you, without you beside me. Without you, without you, without you beside me.
What is going on? I am so excited today. We are back for another rapid fire show. Rapid fire fun, rapid fire features, rapid fire content, rapid fire coaching. We bring them all into you here on our Wednesday show, live every Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific. Really excited about today. You know, we have talked a lot recently about going with the flow and having things happen. And you may have noticed we went live, I think, 2 minutes late. And part of the reason we went live 2 minutes late is sometimes the universe isn't ready for what we're about to do. And so the technology will literally fry out, break it down, and is in anticipation of the fire that we're about to bring. Part of our going with the flow, part of our pivot today was we had a guest drop out last minute. And although I like to go live and freestyle and create some of that content, create some of that fun, and do those other opportunities, I also just intuitively felt that this individual that's going to now join us very last minute might be available. And if she was, I knew that there would be absolutely incredible feature and content created through the dynamic of our conversation. So a little bit of backdrop on our guest today. And we're probably going to go for probably 15, 20, 25 minutes, somewhere in that range. And so we're just going to have a really thoughtful communication around brain health, discovery, internal healing, autonomic nervous system, you name it. There's a whole variety of things that are going to probably come up in this conversation. But I will tell you, I met this individual about a year and a half ago. And I met her virtually on a mastermind with one of my very good friends, George Bryant. It was his small private group. He asked me to come in and speak. And it was just an incredible start to our relationship. And then I've now interacted with her multiple times. I saw her again last October in person. And it wasn't long before I was flying up to Nanaimo, Canada, to see her for her services and her expertise. So I want to go ahead and bring up Natasha Wilch into our show today because I would love the world to get to know who you are, my friend.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am fantastic, and I'm really excited to be here with you. So I gave a little bit of a backdrop, but can you tell the world who you are from your perspective?
Oh, so many different ways to answer that question, to be honest. Okay, let's start with I'm a mom to 3 amazing children. I am a mentor. I'm a friend. I am a wife. But from that business perspective, I'm technically a physical therapist, but it goes so much deeper than that. I'm on this mission. You talked about it a little bit with brain health, to truly evolve and elevate the conversation of concussion and brain health in the world by giving people lives moments back. That is overall encompasses everything that I do.
Yeah, and the lives getting moments back is very real. And, you know, that's certainly something that's connected us far beyond just brain health, because I think so much of our lives are really about putting ourselves in the moment, allowing the impact of the negative moments to last less and less, to be able to move through those difficult moments faster with less effort. And so moments are really critical. For those that don't know, I mean, obviously many people know that I've had a pretty extreme accident and had my left arm removed from my body when I was a little kid. But what many people don't know is that I've also had somewhere between 6 and 8 concussions. And I say somewhere between 6 and 8 because it was a secondary diagnosis in many of my situations. When I tumbled underneath that truck and I've got road rash scars on different parts of my head, there is no doubt that I had a concussion. But when my arm is having to be reattached and my life is needing to be saved, that is truly not only secondary, it's way down the list.
Way down the list.
And so many of the things that I've interacted with and experienced in my life were secondary towards head injury. And I've had lots and lots in my own life through my own journey. But the way it's developed over the last probably 10 years is really just a consistent element of fatigue and a consistent element of brain fog. And there's been a variety of different things I've done to treat that. For a while, we thought I had a growth hormone deficiency and we were going down that path. But for those of you who know me know that I do pretty much whatever I can to put myself in the best position to be who I am and perform at the levels that I need to. And so when I'm having these elements of resistance and energy draining, when I'm having these moments of not being able to perform at the level that I know I'm capable, it means I need to look for help. Natasha's someone I went to for help. And so I had a really incredible experience there during one of your intensive weeks. So literally, she's a physical therapist, but that's just because that's how Canada buckets her level of expertise. And so I want to be really clear, that's nothing good or bad about Canada. But for those of us that are in the United States or different parts of the world, PTs don't always mean the exact same things. And the ways that they're supported throughout the healthcare systems are not always equal depending on which geography of the world that you're in. So a physical therapist, and I have a high level of respect for physical therapists. In fact, my sister-in-law is a doctor, has her own practice. She's a physical therapist. But the knowledge and expertise that Natasha is delivering goes far beyond the general functional medicine that is understood through traditional physical therapy. So could you give us a little bit of a lens into, one, why you got into this work, what motivated you on this path, and what has really driven you up until now? And then two, can you give a little bit of insight as to not just why your passion put you here, but where and how you are actually helping evolve the conversation, the treatment, and what this even looks like in the industry?
Yeah. So it's always really funny when people come to see me for physical therapy, whether it's local clients or whether I'm blessed to have people like yourself that travel and come actually work with me. Because what the common thing they'll always say is, I've never had a physical therapy appointment like this before. Because I don't do what you typically think of in the PT space. And so getting in, it's kind of a two-part story, to be honest. And I'll try and like keep it nice and short. So
take the time you need, my friend. It's a good story.
I initially wanted to be a pediatric surgeon. That was goal number one. I had said it for years. I always wanted to be a doctor. I knew I wanted to work in healthcare. My mom was carried at an extended care unit in the hospital. And I was that kid that would go play the piano for the elderly people, sit by their bed and read them a book, go candy stripe in the hospital. So I always knew health and medicine was something that I was going to step into. But I was going to be a doctor. And so I went to the University of British Columbia and started down this path. And my life got turned upside down about in my second year of university with some own personal trauma things. And it caused me to step back and kind of reevaluate what the heck I wanted to do and where I was going to go. I was feeling very lost, to say the least. And I remember talking with my cousin, and my cousin was a quadriplegic from a motorcycle accident when he was in his early 20s. And when we were talking about his journey and the people that were incredibly instrumental in getting him to where he is, to be able to be independent with his chair and all these things, he didn't talk about the doctors. Like, obviously, yes, they played a huge role, but he talked about the therapists. Mm-hmm. He talked about the PTs and the OTs, and it really struck a chord with me because everything I do, I have such a big heart. Like, everything I do leads with my heart. And I could never do a job where I wasn't able to connect with a person. And I also knew that I wanted to be a mom. I also knew that I wanted to do these things. And I looked at the doctors that I knew in their timetables, and I was like, no. So I ended up like completely switching my major. I had to be, my GPA was so low from university that I couldn't go back to the UBC. I had to go start over. And from a 4.0 student in high school to not being able to get into the faculty you wanted to, that was a bit of a blow. So I went to community college, started from scratch, got my 4.0 back, transferred in, and then graduated with a master's in physical therapy. And at that point, because my cousin was a spinal cord injury, I knew I wanted to work in spine and neuro. So I worked a lot with stroke and Parkinson's and MS. And then, so that's like step one into the physio space. The brain health space, the concussion space is a little bit deeper in the sense that it happened by fluke, which then kind of sparked awareness. And I opened my clinic here in Nanaimo probably 7 years ago now. And an occupational therapist in town referred a concussion client because for whatever reason, this person wasn't recovering. And she was like, I don't know where to send her. Natasha's the brain physio. She works with the nervous system. Concussion's the brain. Let's send her there. And this poor woman walked in my clinic door and I had no idea what to do. And so I sat down with her and I said, here's the deal. I've never treated concussion before, but I want to learn. And if you're willing to go on this journey with me, I will support you 100% with everything I have. And she had no other option.
I want to interrupt you for just a second,
Yeah.
Because what you just did is something that many, many, many professionals don't do. You focused at such a high level of transparency and vulnerability with where your area of expertise was, but also what your interest was. And so I think that's really important. You know, in the coaching space, this is something that we run into all the time, right? People that are feeling like they're going to be funneled or feeling like the coaches just want something from them. They aren't actually finding a way to help them and move them forward. And I think in so many elements in business, what we find too is it's like, I mean, geez, I used to say it when I lived in the risk management and employee benefits consulting firm. It's like we would never work with a healthcare company. And then all of a sudden we'd work with one, we'd figure it out and we were an expert, right? And so then we'd figure out how to market it and double down on that without necessarily always being as open and transparent about where we were in our level of expertise. And so I just wanted to comment on that and honor that for you, because I think that that is clearly in alignment with one of the concepts that we really teach, is that vulnerability is one of the ways we truly connect, and true strength actually hides behind vulnerability. And you demonstrated that. The cool part is you say that she has no other option. You say she had no other option. And I'm sure like in some ways you're convincing yourself that, but you're also downplaying yourself, because she chose the option that was in front of her, likely because of the level of transparency and vulnerability and the passion with which you delivered the message. So I had to pause you for just a second, because I wanted to highlight and allow everybody to see that that is a way that we can do business very ethically, very consciously, and treat the people that we want to impact in such a high intent way. But I also wanted to pause for just a second for you, because she had options. She chose you.
Why, thank you. I'll never forget her. Like, I remember her face. I remember her hair. I remember the tone of her voice. She will forever hold a spot in my own heart, because we had that discussion. She was like, I'm here. I enrolled in a course that weekend, because when someone is entrusting themselves with me,
oh yeah,
there's no way I'm not going to step up and deliver what they're there for. So enrolled in a course that weekend. That course and working with her was the spark to everything that happens today. I dove down that rabbit hole with 2 feet. And what it did, as I then started getting, because literally I then started getting more concussions referred into my door, I started hearing this story. And the story was consistent. It was, no one understands what I'm going through. My family's falling apart. When we think of concussion in the general world, we think sport concussion. We think it's going to be resolved in 3 days, and we move on. And that's not, 80% of people recover in a month. 30% of people get life-changing effects from a concussion.
Did you just do 110%, Natasha?
I might have. Did I say 70 and then 30?
You said 80 and 30. I'm like, wait a minute.
We're creating numbers today. 70 and 30. Creating numbers. But what this did is it sparked something deeper in me, because when I was a teenager, my dad experienced a brain injury. And that was now 22 years-ish ago. And back then, you didn't rehab brain injuries and concussions. But I was 17, I was stubborn, and my stepdad still looked like my dad, right? And no one explained to my mom or to my brother and I the impacts that this injury would have on his day-to-day life. Oh, yeah. So where I'm expecting my dad to be my dad, when he came home after a month in the hospital, he had dizziness, he had headaches, he had sound and light sensitivity, his short-term memory was absolutely terrible. You'd be in a conversation and he would be gone, completely zoned out. Or then 10 minutes later, he'd forget what you just talked about, right? Irritability, those things. It ended up being that when I was 17, I moved out of my parents' house because of the effects that was happening within our family. And no one explains that. And so when I started hearing this again in my practice and seeing these same things and seeing families start to fall apart and people just gutted on how their lives are being impacted, it lit something inside of me that I have just, that was the start of everything. I love that's that transpired.
Though. And I mean, all of it is so relevant, my friend, every single piece of it, and what it shows is that so often we can be shaped by our stories in a way that we don't even see coming or expect. And, you talk about your cousin and you talk about the impact there. And then obviously you didn't even bring in your dad until the tail end of the story, but you were down that path, likely for both reasons, right? You were going down the therapy path because you had an instinct and an intuition, but you also took on this patient because of your passion for concussion recovery and the impacts that it can have throughout a family, throughout a society, throughout culture. And the reality of it is that's something that I was impacted by. I have a deep appreciation, like I said, for physical therapy and occupational therapy, because I've done it both for many reasons. And I was in it for years. And I also deeply appreciate what you said around the connection with not only the time, but the intent between the doctors and the day-to-day weekly caregivers for recovery. It is completely different. And, there are 1 or 2 doctors in my past that I can really look back on and know without a doubt that I'm forever indebted to them for what they did, how they showed up, how they communicated. But largely it was the support teams, right? Physical therapy, the techs, everybody else that really wrapped our family and supported us. And those are the folks that we still have relationships with today, largely. And so I really appreciate that. One of the things that I know was most impactful for me But I will tell you that I've also shared this a number of times since you and I talked, because my basic understanding on the autonomic nervous system really wasn't as complete as I thought it was coming in, and how things can actually stack from the bottom of the period on top if you don't have the foundation set. So often in life, in business, right? You know, I'm really, really big on being super aware and super intentional and making sure that foundation is really set before we leverage and scale. Right. So often I think people get themselves way out and over their skis because they don't properly set the foundation or understand the ripple effects if they don't properly set the foundation as their businesses and lives continue to grow. So could you talk to us a little bit about that pyramid and the philosophy on where and how you treat? Because I know in my situation, there wasn't anything glaring where it was like, this is where we're going to target. Right. And so if you needed to use me as an example to use this, great. Feel free. If you don't, go for it. I just want you to know you got freedom to share my story however you want.
I love it. So, I mean, I think it was back to when we started talking too, just the reciprocal nature of our journey. Like Brian opened up a door in me that let me unpack so much of my own trauma, and he didn't even know it. Like he spoke, but something he said in that message gave me the invitation to finally have the strength and the courage in myself to unpack my own trauma, my own shame. And over the last year and a half, leaning into that has been massive. But that in itself, and this is going to speak to what I'm talking about here in a second too.
Yeah, I got you.
Being able to lean into that, being able to explore that, being able to feel that safety has adamantly impacted my own health and brain health in a positive way as well. So when we look at brain health as a whole, or when I look at concussion as a whole, it is a multimodal effect, right? So the pyramid makes up one component of the total picture. So I talk about 4 pillars of brain health. Like, I mean, they're not rocket science. I look at neurology, physiology. I look at mindset and beliefs and thoughts, which is where I've had major change this year. I look at lifestyle, and then I look at support and community. Those are the 4 pillars for me. Within the neurology, physiology is really my niche. Like that's where people come to see me for, is that piece. So this pyramid was actually taught to me by my mentor. And then we've kind of adapted it, shifted it. So it is basically this relevance that when people start to notice things, usually it's cognitive. So you usually start to notice things like brain fog, or you start to notice things like, I'm just not as clear, or my thoughts are a little bit slower, or, it's taking me a little bit longer to do things, or memory issues. Like these are the things that people start to trickle in and kind of notice, right? And there's a ton of hacks and things we can do to do that and to kind of help address that. But I'm also of the belief that if you have a strong foundation, then you can build and layer, and the other things ultimately truly start to fall into place. And so for you, that was a big piece of what we looked at, was the foundation. And the foundational piece of this pyramid is the autonomic nervous system. And I use objective measures to give us an insight into what your systems are doing. So to function in this world as a human, we take in a ton of sensory information through, like I say 6 senses, but sight, you have balance, you have vestibular, you have smell, all these lovely things. And then our brain has to process that information. And then from that processing, we have an output, which is a movement or an emotion or something. And if your brain is having difficulty processing all that sensory information, it means your output's going to be affected. So with Brian in particular, the things I look at in this pyramid is I look at the autonomic nervous system. Then I look at something called your neuroreflexes. There's things your brain does that you do not ever think about, but it's that reflex that lets you know that your world is vertical. It lets you know where you are in space, so you don't have to think about every step you take, right? Then we look at things called primitive reflexes. They're survival reflexes. Normally they're integrated as infants, but once we have brain injuries, they can show up again. And they're kind of like, imagine you were climbing a ladder and then there was 2 rungs missing. You could still get to the next, but it's sure going to be easier if those rungs are in place, right? Then we look at purposeful movement. How is your body activating muscles? How are you moving? Are you moving in an efficient way? Or are you using compensatory strategies to achieve a task which actually uses more energy? And then on top of that is cognition. The reason I love the autonomic nervous system so much, and when I'm talking about the autonomic nervous system, I'm saying it's this nervous system that functions within us. You do not think about it. It is completely involuntary, but the things and the choices we make absolutely impact it. And we have what's called super high level parasympathetic and sympathetic. Our rest and digest. This is the one that's happening when we're calm. This is when we learn. This is when we heal. And then we have our sympathetic, which is our fight and flight. It's our mobilization one. It's, you have higher cortisol, you have higher adrenaline, all this stuff. We need both. One is not bad, but we need dynamic nature between the two. And what happens a lot with particularly my concussion clients, but people who are doing things like brain fog and all these other things, they get stuck in a higher dominant sympathetic nervous system.
Yep.
And the beautiful thing is today I can measure that. And I can measure that remotely, which is even more exciting. So I use these measures, and then we do this whole assessment, which we did with you. We did a 2-hour assessment with you with my goggles and my posturography and my virtual reality and stuff at the bedside. And the purpose of that assessment was to figure out which of your systems are working well and processing the environment well.
Yeah.
And which of them aren't. Because the autonomic nervous system responds in 2 ways. It will respond to perceived threat. And I say perceived because you may logically, you know, you're not in danger, but your nervous system, whether it's a trauma trigger, whether it's an emotional trigger, whatever it is, perceived threat. And then it also responds to a mismatch in sensory processing. So we need to tackle the foundation from those 2 angles. And that's what we did with you.
So what I really find fascinating is on the scientific process element of what you do, it actually is philosophically aligned with exactly what we discuss from an emotional trigger standpoint. The reality of it is our autonomic and our sympathetic nervous system, right? The combined elements of how those actually happen and the fight or flight and those reactionary responses, they are literally the body's way of putting armor up and protecting ourselves so that we can be safe. It's to put ourselves in those positions, right? The fight or flight response is a natural evolutionary response to survival. You get chased by a tiger 150 years ago or anything, like, guess what? Like you need that adrenaline rush to drive you forward. You need that influx of cortisol. You need those additional hormone productions. But so often in today's world, the external effects are not nearly as drastic or severe that literally put our life in threat, yet we're conditioned to operate the same way. And so whether it's an emotional trigger response or whether there's a foundational piece, and by the way, it's not mutually exclusive because these feed off of each other, and people's ability to better understand their emotions and have better, more level-centered self also directly correlates to the autonomic nervous system. And so what I love about a lot of the work that you did is you talk about all these different structures, right? You talk about the 4 pillars of brain health. And for me, I would tell you that the other 3, other than this piece, were pretty solid, right? And you even told me, you're like, it's your level of discipline that probably has allowed you to maintain because your physiology isn't supporting the rest of your lifestyle. And for us, it's probably a combination of my head traumas, but also likely the fight or flight response my body's been in since my arm was ripped off 30 years ago. And truly an intentional process of healing holistically to try to bring all of that back into check. And so I will tell you, I am typically insanely disciplined. And I recently texted you and said to you, I was like, I've actually fallen off on some of the practices. And part of the reason, which is interesting, is because as I've focused primarily on activities to get my autonomic nervous system in check, my brain fog has almost completely eradicated. So despite the fact that I still have elements in my body that I'm not getting the same level of rest and recovery, like my HRV is still lagged, I'm doing externally all the things I can. And so to me, it's a matter of time because I'm resetting my systems, which don't happen just like we say with emotions. It's not like you flip a switch and your trauma and your shame goes away overnight. It's a process.
It's a process.
Right?
And it's a consistent process.
Exactly. And so since I've leaned into some of the consistent processes around focusing particularly on my autonomic nervous system, some of the brain specific activities that I was doing to maintain from the clinic haven't been as relevant or necessary to get me to operate up here, which is great because we start to grow out of the need and how they're going to impact us. And so I just think it's fascinating because I talk to a lot of people, and whether it's a brain injury or not, one of the big things that I'm really starting to believe in general is how much our autonomic nervous system impacts not only brain health, not only impacts cognitive functioning, all of the elements of what you outlined, but it also really impacts our ability to just be who we are, be centered and aligned, and to be able to have the level of connection with ourselves to be able to recognize when we need a reset. And so I'm grateful because even though I was doing a bunch of biohacking stuff before, you knew I was already in this. I'm super disciplined, tons of meditation, tons of consciousness work. There were certain pieces of the structure that I didn't understand. So I couldn't translate what that meant in my world. So you gave me a pathway, and now I've walked my own path slightly with knowledge, which is great because now you've elevated and empowered me to actually treat and heal myself in a really powerful way.
Well, and when we talk about health hacks, right? I have nothing wrong with health hacks, but they're only going to work so much if you don't have the foundation for them to work on. So yes, you can use red light therapy. Yes, you can cold plunge. I do them both every day. But if you have a stronger foundation and then you do those health hacks, it's going to catapult, right? It's going to be paramount. For me too, like when we look at the autonomic, I'm so passionate about the autonomic nervous system, and not just in brain injury, and working with entrepreneurs and working with other people just to really open themselves up. Because when we can when we can regulate, when we can really create that dynamic foundation in and I say dynamic because like you said, we need sympathetic and parasympathetic. You would die if you didn't have both. And so when we can restore this dynamic relationship between our systems, what that does for us as humans is it opens our capacity. It opens our tolerance for stress. It opens our ability to respond instead of react, because we then also have tools that when we are aware, we can pull them into place and respond and settle and then go. Your capacity to lead, your capacity for creativity, your capacity, like obviously I get fired up. Your capacity for all of this explodes.
Yeah. And
for me, like that is, I mean, in my own life as well, like I've known all this, and truly for me, it was the opposite of more going into, we needed neurology for you, we needed mindset for me.
But that's the point, is that it always is holistic,
how these
right?
factors impact.
Yeah.
And for me, that's just kind of that huge piece of it. And when we talk about autonomics too, we have research behind it. We know that if you have a crappy autonomic nervous system, if you are living in sympathetic dominance, your cognition is slower, your memory is poorer, you're at higher risk for premature death, you're at higher risk for heart disease. You don't, like it goes on and on, which is why for me, I talk about like, yes, I rehab concussions, but I also help people optimize their brain health. And when I say I optimize brain health, I'm truly helping you through understanding these 4 pillars of how we create a dynamic autonomic nervous system so you can have the capacity to lead, to be creative, to explore, because that's when all those things happen.
So I think that's just beautiful. I so deeply appreciate you. And one of the things that I've said here recently a number of times, and I got this extracted language from my observation with my son, right? He's on the autism spectrum. And so it was a really easy way as he's been growing up for me to correlate this, but it obviously correlated to me. It correlates to a lot of people in general. And so this concept of when the demands of our environment exceed our ability to cope, we shut down, right?
Absolutely.
We go into fight or flight. Our armor starts to go up. Our cortisol starts to raise. Our stress response and fight or flight response starts to raise, which is why when you see in kids, particularly with autism, right, sometimes they've got motor function. They've got inability to have like the ability to control impulse control. They've got all this movement and this anxiety that comes out in physical movement that is mislabeled often as behavioral when it's really a neurological element that they are processing through. And so when I think about all those things, right, I've said in my past, right, when I shut off pain on my left side physically because it exceeded my ability to cope, right? When you get a limb removed and ripped off your body, not in a clean severed way, guess what? There's a lot of pain. And the reality of it is I think that many of us can only handle so much pain before we shut off. And fortunately, I was in a position where though I experienced the pain, I was able to numb it significantly by shutting off intentionally. And the reality of it is when I shut that off, I also shut off emotional pain, emotional processing, right? And where and how I was connecting to myself. And all of this is the same concept. It's all the same foundation. It's just different ways of getting there. Mm-hmm. And I am a big believer in this holistic healing. But what we recognize is that when resistance and energy bubbles up in our life, when we aren't moving in the way that we want to, when we feel like we've got a lag, when we feel like we're maybe carrying extra weight, when we feel like we're not as lit up and energized as we normally are, that's resistance and energy drain. When you're experiencing resistance and energy drain in your life, it's pointing you at what's important if you're paying attention. And so whether it is neurological, whether it's actually focusing on the emotional side, the psychosocial emotional piece, whether it's truly health and physical movement, whether it's spiritual health and healing, it doesn't really matter. But the reality of it is in those 4 pillars that we have to see ourselves clearly so we can move forward And I'm a really big believer that in the foundation of so much of what we do, our autonomic nervous system for every single person can really benefit our lives. So Natasha works with people, obviously, in her specialty in brain health and concussion treatment. But she's also been really growing and expanding to look in 2 different areas that are really expanding the collective impact in this space. She's provided opportunities in a community to really create this platform for education, continued growth, and alternative ways to challenge the norm for practitioners in this space, doctors, PTs, and not just in Canada, all over the globe. So she's got this phenomenal community of individuals that are interested in learning around not just the autonomic nervous system and overall brain health and function, but where and how do they deliver this in their practice? Where and how do they use this in their lives to grow? And then she also has this other division where she does performance coaching for high performers in a way that she really helps you look at your numbers, your overall health, and all of these pillars where she can actually help you dial and refine your life, your choices to keep your autonomic nervous system in check, your brain health operating as great as possible, and using the resources that she has, whether it's emotional, physical, spiritual, to also drive you towards the highest level of performance. So if you have any interest in getting a hold of Natasha, she is definitely one of the world-renowned experts in this space. Yes, there's many who do this work, but I will tell you that she puts more heart into it than many that I've experienced. And so when you look at overall brain health, again, we know that one of the hardest journeys to complete is the 18-inch journey from our head to our heart. She's leading with heart and treating heads, and she's doing it in a really powerful way. And so I just encourage all of you to reach out. You can reach her at natashawilch.com. If they've got, if they're on social media and want to connect with you another way, what's another great way to connect with you? Oh, there it is.
There we go, Instagram.
See, my team is so good. They're already on it. They
They're
knew where I was
amazing.
going. They heard me teeing it up. They put that out there where I didn't even have to ask for it. Like,
I didn't have to send
that
anything.
is teamwork.
I love
Teamwork
it.
makes the dream work.
I respond to every message that I receive on Instagram. So by all means, yes, reach out.
Well, my dear friend, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you're going to be here in just a few weeks, and I cannot wait to have you. It's going to be so much fun. We're going to actually start off our day focusing on our autonomic nervous system with doing some cold plunges, some infrared therapy, and some saunas as we begin our one-day offsite. So really
I had to
looking forward to
giggle
it.
when I sent you that text message, and I was like, I don't know if anyone's asking this, but can we start with red light, cold plunge, and stuff?
I was all for it. I was all for it. I was like, yes, let's go, because I think it's so
I love
important, and it'll start us off on the right foot for the day. So thank you so
100%.
much, Natasha, for jumping in last minute, for bringing the fire, for really helping all of us elevate and empower our own education in how we operate and how we can get our brains operating at the highest level.
Thank you very much.
Talk soon, my friend.
Bye.
All righty, everybody. So we are going to wrap up here just in the next couple of minutes, but I really just want to make sure that that is one of our key takeaways from today. When the demands of our environments exceed our ability to cope, we shut down. If our brains stop functioning, if our hearts stop functioning, if our souls stop functioning, if we aren't able to keep ourselves open in a place that we can truly connect, then we will always be isolated. We have never been so disconnected as a society, but we are hardwired and we desire to connect. And so we are not only helping individuals navigate this through the internal journey of healing, but we are partnering with individuals like Natasha so that we've got a holistic nature on really helping people maximize their level of performance. There is not a one size fits all, and it's a multidimensional place to really make sure that who you are is operating at the highest level that you are capable so that you are meeting your potential. It's one of the things that we say often in our world, and the people that we surround ourselves with, is that we help giants become legends by helping them grab what they think is just out of their grasp. What do you want to reach for? What are you trying to accomplish? And where are the demands of your environment exceeding your ability to cope? And where do you need to heal as a result of that? What changes do you need to make? What growth do you need to have? What layers of armor do you need to shed so that you can open yourself to connect at the deepest levels with yourself and use that to permeate outward? We've got a small group program that is launching again in July. We had a lot of great results from the last one. If you're interested in learning more about that, please go to nolimitsus.com or shoot me a DM. Better yet, I'd love to have a conversation with you. The reality of it is we've got a really great place where you can get a feature and understanding of what this program is. But at the end of the day, it's all about connection. So I want to connect with you. Natasha, thank you very much for joining us today. And if you have any questions, feel free to text me at 602-704-5189 or shoot me an email at brian@brianbogert.com. Till we see you next time, be great.